And in the 70s, I worked for consumer organisations, and we were frequently in often quite fierce debates. And that was about health, welfare, all sorts of things. And I just seem to recall that in those days you would have interest groups and the government and various people of different persuasion who put sometimes passionately their views. What I tend to recall was that the media, with some analysis and some critique, would report on those things. It seems to me today we have three parties, the contenders as it were, and then a separate set of values that come back in a media analysis that is sort of a bit different to them. And I just wonder if you observe that, and whether you see that as actually a particularly good thing in the public policy formation.
The reason why it isn't a good thing is because it's a variation of what I described with the numbers that John Howard's generating his final term out of P and C. One of the reasons, this comes back to a couple of other points, and this is not just about the Murdoch press or not just about the treatment of Julia Gillard. One of the things that happened in the last few years is that the demand, even in my time, to produce more copy has created this phony economy where to continue generating more and more work, whether I mean to or not, I default to opinion. I always try to correct for this, but it's very hard because you have to do something quickly. The thing that we could do in the 70s and the 80s, and especially in the 60s and 70s, is there's a great bit of paperwork here, a great bit of paperwork there. You had a cup of tea, or you maybe had a beer with them. You went to happy hour with the Treasury in the afternoon, on the Friday, whenever it was. They used to have happy hour in those days. And Johnstone, before my time, but just got reminded this afternoon when I catch up with a certain somebody. The journalists would be there mixing it with the Treasury officers and a few other things. But your day job didn't tell you that you had to have 8 sorts in that day. So the day job told you that you could weigh the material you were dealing with. And that is how you recapture that is going to be very, very... This is why when this thing settles, I'll be interested to see whether there's a career for any of us. But that's what you're looking at. What you're looking at is what feels like a more reflective time. It's actually a time where you didn't have this incessant demand on the journalists to produce copy instantaneously. And the reason why a lot of debates today have such short attention spans, public attention spans, is the poor journalists, and I do say this as a lament, 2004 to 2005 would have been the first year I consciously avoided opening every email from the Prime Minister's office and the opposition news office. So I've been at a disadvantage for about 6 or 7 years now, where previously, in the 80s and the 90s when I used to cover in Canberra, I knew pretty much everything that the Prime Minister and the opposition had said because they appeared enough for me to be able to digest. I'd be able to read the big reports when they came out, and I'd have about 8 ideas for a story, and I'd be able to dribble them out over a period of months. Today, I've got to produce all that in one go, knowing that I can't do all the elementary research because I've got to make a gut call about whether so-and-so on FM radio can say anything different. They probably haven't. So then what happens? This is why, and it's a very important point. When you notice that almost the reporting of something is almost running tangential to the issue, it's probably because the journalist is flustered. And one of the reasons the journalist is flustered is that they're asked to do so much that they actually default about the only thing they can know, which is the now of. Like I say, I always try to self-correct for it, but it's very difficult because you often find yourself defaulting to your pub talk, which is your snap analysis. Sometimes you can be razor sharp at that point, but I get to do it every day. And I think that's what you're observing. And I think a lot of people in this room would understand this, because it's not that the paperwork is like this, it's that you know you're doing a lot of work that is not going to be able to be received at the other end. And that, whether that's demoralising or not, I know for a journalist it's demoralising that you can't get any sense out of your political issues anymore. It's doubly demoralising for a journalist where you've been told for about the last 15 years you're not allowed to talk to public servants, unless that public servant has pre-checked the conversation with some 28-year-old in the minister's office. Sorry, 12-year-old.
My team.
I apologise, I'm giving you instant correction. So, I suspect what you're looking at, there's no private help here from the journalists. I think that some of the journalists have just, this is about the only way they can manage.
I was just going to ask you, bearing in mind you have an audience with many public servants, what are your thoughts on FOI? And what do you think are your reasonable expectations of public servants when you ask them for information? And what, if anything, do they have to fear from talking to you?
I think got deaf.
This is, that's a very good question. You would say politicians and media executives say that is a very good question. Take the third one first. What does a public servant have to fear? They should have nothing to fear. Talking as a journalist, because you know more than I do. So what have you got to worry about? If you know more than what I do, then you need to know what I'm thinking. One of the reasons why you need to know what I'm thinking is I'm about to write on something you know more than I do about. So you need to give me every chance to get it right. And that's always the way. Every journalist will tell you this. This is what they love to be able to do. They love. I was just talking to a colleague before, earlier today, who's slightly younger than me, so has only known the post-80s world covering federal politics, which is that they never get to meet bureaucrats. I mean, I'm a slight advantage to them because I've grown up in the other era, and you're able to maintain some of these informal contacts. But as I say, you need to tell the minister this, that government, and I'll just take a step back. I was stunned, and Jim could probably help me with this. In the 70s, it is the case that the Treasury used to background journalists about what was in the budget. And when was the last time that happened? They have a lock-up now, but apparently you can't even trust the Treasury to put together some of the economic statements. Apparently you can't trust the Treasury to talk to economic journalists to tell them, this is the Costello and the Swan model. No disrespect to either Treasury, terrific treasurers both of them, they got us out of the GFC variously and vicariously. But this idea that, the sharpest department in Canberra is not allowed to talk to journalists and hasn't been allowed to talk to journalists for 10 or 15 years in the economic sphere when they're in command of the big thoughts that go out to the real world about economic policies. Crazy stuff. Now, I can't speak for any other departments, but I can give you a roll call anecdote on that. There are particular officers that I used to get on really well with. Changed the government in '96. They didn't actually bring up the side allowed to talk to anymore. They just stopped talking because the minister said you're not allowed to talk to them. Now, this happens at state level, it's happened on both sides of politics, it's not a party political comment. But it's actually a crazy situation because I know when I pick up the phone to the 12-year-old that they know less than I do. Now, the 12-year-old at some point is going to realise that they don't know enough, and then they're going to tie up the poor bureaucrat anyway, providing a mountain of briefing paper which they're not going to be able to return a call on anyway. So I would cut that 12-year-old out of this conversation. Absolutely. But you've got to remember why you're talking to journalists. You're actually backgrounding them on government policies, you're backgrounding them on policy, you're backgrounding them on how the thing works, and you're also educating them. That stuff can't do it. That's why you shouldn't fear it. Now, of course, the government is afraid of letting the information out, so I'll get back to this FOI point. I think you should let as much out as you possibly can because it actually reduces the value of the leak. Just think about how easy it is to manipulate it tonight. Like you would be able to slip me something that hasn't been out for a little while, it might be your pet project, it may be of no consequence at all to the future of mankind, but because you give it to me, and I'm not supposed to have it, I'll write a huge story about it. And these incentives are there for media. But you know what? The incentives are there for people who want to do damage as well. I actually think bureaucracies can protect themselves against their rogue elements by being allowed to engage almost on a daily basis with specialists in their field. Now, of course, what happens is once you get to talk to them, and this used to be the case, and I'll give you a really good example of this, anyone who remembers Trevor Boucher, who was the tax commissioner in the 80s. So Trevor had two people working for a media unit, and what they did was pretty much pass on every call they got from specialist writers to basically the divisional or the section head, who were given media training and basically taught to not fear the media. Now the police work a variation is, but the police are obviously a slightly more corruptible business than revenue collection. Now I've made contact with the tax office for about 15 years, 10 years maybe, because I've got like a media unit of about 120 people now. And I'm not making this up. But basically the first call you put in, it takes about a week for it to get returned to you. And this is why you actually, without realising, by trying to control the information, I know no one in this room is guilty of any of this, but some politicians they work for are certainly guilty of it. You try to control this information, you've placed a phony premium on what it is you're trying to protect. You're making it seem a lot more exotic than it is, and you're making us mad. So what you're making us do is go hunt some of the strangest things just to prove it, that we could pull one over your eyes. Now, I could give you the leak cycle for any standard semi-literate journalist in Australia. They get their leak, they give it a good run, and then the next day they ring somebody else in the system and say, can I have the memo that says you're not allowed to talk to the media? And that's always the day two. If you watch this, it's always the day two follow on the big leaks. It's the second leak. Is some poor person has been empowered, a department or something, has been told by the minister to send out an all-points bulletin to the department saying thou shall not talk to the media. That is the thing that will leak next after the first week. So that's a long way of getting around to the question on FOI. I don't use it anymore because I know how time-consuming it is and it doesn't get me what I'm looking for. And the way the system works now, if I can't ask a precise question, you know, like that, before the prequels, the first Star Wars where he used the Force to go straight down the chute. If I can't, you know, to within a decimal point, being able to specify what I'm looking for, I won't get it. Which means that what we do, because we know we can't get that sort of stuff, is that we then cast the widest roof net possible and tie up bureaucracies for weeks, months, and years. Give me everything you've got on bracket creep, and then they go, no. But if you'd ask a specific question, and they say, wait a minute, it probably doesn't hurt the public debate to let this out, I'll let it out on day one. But that's where FOI ended up. I'd actually probably reverse the onus now, and you watch how hard it will be for a bureaucracy or for a government essentially to be able to say, this should be protected. I go open source, except in cabinet and conference stuff. Basically, any bit of policy advice on something that's been actioned that actually informs how, you know, basically the mechanics of the policy should be out. Now, I know that sounds a bit radical. You might have to change the way you write some of these things. WikiLeaks will do this to you anyway, whether you want to or not. But I'd reverse the onus on FIR. Somebody has to prove to somebody why this particular information can't come out. So the answer should be yes, unless. So that's 3 points.
Thank you very much. They really said that very high expectations for you.